Hello and welcome to the Testing Peers. Tonight we're going to be talking about the testing community and what it means to us. Tonight we have all four of the testing peers, starting off with Simon.
Hello.
Chris.
Hello.
Russell.
Hello.
And myself, David. We are delighted to be sponsored again by Saffron QA. Saffron QA are specialists in the testing recruitment, and they provide a range of bespoke recruitment services to organisations across the UK. For further details about Saffron QA, please see the show notes or visit saffronqa.co.uk. So at this point, I will pass over to Simon.
Thank you, David. So given that we're talking about communities, and specifically the testing community, I thought I would ask the question of whether in our past we've been part of any other communities outside of work and our experiences with those communities. So, I mean, I can start. I've been part of church communities in the past. I set up a dad's community in Aylesbury that got me newspaper coverage because I was setting up an Aylesbury dads group that was similar to Mumsnet, apparently, even though it was never at the scale, obviously. It became a Facebook group. I think there's about 120 people in there that talk about dad stuff, whatever that is, on a regular basis. Community-wise, yeah, just wanted to see what kind of other communities you may be part of, what your experiences are in the past, etc.
I'm the son of a vicar, so I've been in lots of churches throughout my life, and there's certainly a lot of things that I've noticed in those things that are communities. But beyond that, I've been in tennis clubs and football clubs, and those groups are groups where people are joined together by that one core thing that we all love and enjoy. And there are things like banter and support and games and social events and WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups and what have you. And yeah, they've been a lot of fun. They can be cruel. They weren't cruel to be kind. They were just cruel, but they were also fun.
So yeah, I guess I'm a bit like Chris. Most of my sort of communities outside of work were kind of sports related. So like fencing, badminton, got involved in those sort of scenes, and university sort of socialising those sort of areas for that as well. I don't know if this counts because it's kind of in the field of work, but meetups and getting involved heavily in the sort of community to help build and put on meetups in sort of the area, the Northeast, that sort of thing.
For me, again, meetups in slightly less work-related stuff, basically running community and, again, communicating, support, and also cheering on from behind, while people do races and stuff. So, yeah, quite a good community in that respect.
And what really sort of connects all of those is most communities that we've all been part of have had that common thing that we're all interested in, that common interest, that thing that drives us and motivates us to be part of those groups, which I think leads us nicely on to talking about the testing community and why we're part of it and what it brings to our lives. So where did our journey with the testing community start? Russell, you talked about meetups. Was that your first journey into the communities?
No, it was probably the BCS, British Computer Society, and the sort of conferences down in London, and just trying to make connections. So it was the first thing I found, I think, that I could connect to other people in the same field, talking about the same thing. But this was 10, 15 years ago. I don't think there was a ministry test Slack at the time, things like that. So it was just a way to kind of start connecting. I was reading testing newspapers, almost, the things that came out. That's why I wanted to get involved, just to share knowledge, learn initially.
I think for me, again, it was a test bash that made me recognise that there was a sort of a community out there. Before that, I'd fallen into testing. I was doing methodologies, but I didn't appreciate my role because I wasn't really part of a test group. So it's only once I got part of a test group and then had the ability to go down to a conference that allowed me to then feel, oh, right, okay, there are more people. I can share ideas. And in those days, again, it was a little more difficult because we didn't have the Slack channel. We didn't have that sort of camaraderie or able to chat as easily. So I think it's a lot more easier now. On the other hand, sometimes I think that there's almost too much information. Sometimes it's difficult to sort of sift through the useful stuff. Often with these communities, you often find similar people, a bit like your friendship groups, with similar mindsets, a bit like we have. So therefore you can share ideas in a confident way without feeling pressured or judged by them. By some of the larger communities, you can sometimes feel a bit like that.
Yeah, I didn't know a testing community was a thing. In fact, I didn't even know for years that communities of people who have a day job that they share with lots of other people in lots of other companies, and they come and talk together. That whole idea of people sharing their day jobs with other people baffled me for a long time. The only communities I really saw were ones like in the games companies I worked for. They had communities where fans of the particular game that you're working on, there were forums and things like that. And that was kind of my concept of what a community was in a software sense. And so when I first attended a testing conference, and it was Eurostar, so it was a bit mind-bogglingly big. I've since discovered that Richard Bradshaw and Vernon Richards were at the same one as me. Never saw them. It's a shame. That really blew my mind, because there's a huge event and there's people who do my job, people who are passionate about my job, people who've got new and exciting ideas, who aren't just being told what to do by their companies, and they're actually sharing these ideas outside of their companies. And that whole thing just blew my little mind. I was scared, and I tried to quite quickly thought, oh, I can be able to participate in this. I'll talk at a conference. And I got rejected. And then that put me off 4 years. And it was actually the reintegration for me was via Ministry of Testing and Test Bash, and the ease of which I could join that community and participate and find like-minded individuals. And that's kind of my intro to that bit.
Yeah, I would agree. I think my first experience of the testing community particularly, it's kind of agile/testing, because I went to an agile conference in Cambridge in 2010, and there was a few agile testing people there, and there was lots of conversations about testing, and I was just trying to move into testing at that point. So they encouraged me to sort of pursue what I wanted to go into. And then I remember the BCS Agile group and the BCS Sigist conferences, going to some of those in London. Although there was talks about people doing different things, there wasn't that community feel of let's all get together and talk about it afterwards and whatever else. There was very much you come to the conference, you've only talked to people you know, and you go home again kind of thing. There wasn't really that networking wasn't really a thing, or it didn't feel like it was at that point. And then for me, I went to Test Bash 2015. I can't remember how I found the Test Bash conference. I was looking for conferences, and I think I stumbled across the Software Testing Club at that point. And it was Test Bash 2015 that really triggered the community thing for me, but not straight away in a good way, because I went to Test Bash and I didn't feel like I fitted in. I felt a bit of an outsider. I didn't feel like I could talk to anyone because everyone seemed to know each other already. So I ended up sort of spending most of my time with the 3-4 colleagues that I went with and not really mixing. But I got the vibe from the day that community was a big thing, and they talked lots about meetups. And at the back of that, I went away and I set up the Aylesbury Tester Gathering at that point and started growing a local community. I think we had 7 at our first meetup. And that's how I then evolved that view of community. And then over time, felt like I could participate more in the wider Ministry of Testing community as well.
I think you raised quite a good point there, because I think that sometimes conferences, and I think this is an interesting distinction, is where does a conference finish and a community start? Besides that, I think that conferences can be quite intimidating, especially if you are coming into the industry. You don't know a lot of people. There are pockets of people that know each other, have been to other conferences, and it is very difficult to sometimes break into that. So I think you also mentioned a really good thing is the meetups. The meetups are slightly more local. And so therefore, again, a bit like when we first described in the first bit, our banter, we all thought of things locally. You know, we didn't think of things globally. We could be part of some climate community that's a global thing, but we chose not to. We chose those sort of intimate and local things where we got to know people really well. And I think that meetups are a really good thing, because therefore it is slightly more local. You can also have a social side with it, which you can't always with a conference. And so therefore you can maintain that connection with those people locally.
So beyond conferences and local meetups, what else do we think has really helped our experience in communities? Like what is it that's kept us coming back to these sorts of things? Like, what are the sort of access points we've had in a community that's helped us feel a part of that thing?
I think over the last few years, particularly, and maybe even more so since the pandemic, I think the virtual communities, the Slack groups, the forums, I think that's really helped to move forward and continue discussing stuff, which we wouldn't have usually done in that way. And I think because of the nature of not feeling like we're able to meet people in person. There has been a lot more focus on that. And I think certainly Ministry of Testing and a few others as well have actually adopted that, right, we're online, we're virtual, let's make that the best type of community we can now, and done everything they can to facilitate that in the best way. And I think that has really helped communication. I've certainly felt over the last couple of years like I've communicated with a lot more people. I've got to know a lot more of the testing community. I feel like I fit more now than I did 2 or 3 years ago. And I think the virtual element of that has helped.
I definitely think that the virtual element has helped with that communication. There are channels now that it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can talk to people. And I think there are, we mentioned MOT as well, that the reaching out to other people on a weekly basis, and the actual face-to-face, I mean face-to-face obviously in a virtual world, but doing a Zoom call and talking to someone from, again, it's an interesting thing, because I was saying about local things, actually, that you can talk to people from around the world, even in different time zones. And it's so interesting talking to different people and recognizing that actually the issues that we have in the testing in this country is the same as everywhere else in the world. So it's the same problems we're getting everywhere. And that really helps me as a tester, because actually what I'm doing to improve my life, I can transfer that skill to anyone else, or advise other people and use my experiences to help them.
We've talked quite a lot about sort of Slack-based community stuff, and virtual coffee certainly has been a channel that I've been a big fan of, and I've met a lot of good people in it. I think there's other sort of access points to these community things as well, aren't there? I mean, certainly Simon and myself have been quite active on Twitter, and we've connected with a whole bunch of people via that social media.
I would say with Twitter, and I don't know if we'll talk this further, but Twitter, I think it's really good to meet other people that are within the industry, but almost like-minded, because Twitter seems to work in bubbles. And it feels like you're talking to people.
It's an echo chamber.
Yeah, absolutely. You're talking to people that all believe it the same way you do. And that can sometimes be a bit of a culture shock when you then try and post the same message on another social media, such as LinkedIn, and you get very different responses, because it's whatever it is, whether it's the algorithms or the way things are posted, a lot more varied people from varied areas of the community see your post and respond in very different ways. I've talked about it before that you can get someone agreeing with you 100% on Twitter, but on LinkedIn, especially if you're talking about agile ways or DevOps ways or more advanced ways on Twitter, that there seems to be a lot more pursuing of the modern trends and bettering yourself. Whereas the vibe you get on LinkedIn with a similar discussion is that actually 90% of the industry is still in the old-fashioned ways that we've been trying to move away from for years. And I think that's where different corners of the community live in different places, and we have to adapt ourselves depending on the audience.
I think you're right, though. Very much that different places of the community will engage in different areas. And we talked about the Twitter there, we've done Slack, we've done meetups. You guys, a couple of you, Simon and Chris again, have done blogs. That's engaging with the community. It's not a conversation that you're engaging with, but it's putting information out there that others can benefit from. Yeah. And that, to me, is also a strong part of community, because you're sharing your interest, you're sharing your passion, but it's passive versus dynamic versus engaging sort of thing. But there's a lot of things that do things like that: blog posts, talks, articles, you name it. There's kind of a lot of different ways to the community, but just creating courses and training that I think Automation University, the Aptly Tools have done, and there's ones for BlazeMeter and other places. Those sort of places help to build a community by sharing ideas, knowledge, and sharing that interest, that passion. There's quite a lot of ways that the community is out there if you look for it.
It is something that I don't know if it's true for you three, but I've certainly found that I've eventually ended up getting more out of the community the more that I've put in. So the more time that I've spent interacting with people, the more time I've spent trying to give back, the more that I've actually been able to receive in terms of feedback or advice or different ideas and things. And that sort of interactivity has helped to sort of sharpen some of my opinions and thoughts, either reinforce or indeed, like Simon says, get challenged on things. Like, it's really important to not all be singing off the same choir sheet all the time, and to actually hear contrary opinions, but in a respectful way.
Yeah.
And for the most part, I've been incredibly lucky on all of these places, or that I've been a member of a community where I haven't been on the receiving end of any really negative personal kinds of feedback, but I've seen it.
Yeah.
And I've heard it. And that's the difficult part of community that I don't think a lot of us talk about much.
No, I agree. And I think I've certainly experienced that. I think I mentioned it before. I experienced it very early on with one of my very first blog posts. It got torn apart by someone very senior in the testing world, which at the time I had no idea who he was. It made it very difficult for me to then want to engage with that person for a while until I got to learn more about that. Tended to be his style of communicating advice in a way was to pull something apart in a constructive way. And I took it probably worse than I should have done because I was new. I was defensive of my opinion. I thought I was doing something new and interesting with the way I was testing stuff. And actually it was something that at the time it felt like, everyone else apart from me was doing. But, equally, I'd like to be challenged. Part of the reason why I put posts out there is it's my opinion on something. I expect that I will get feedback that isn't, yeah, this is great. This is exactly what I've been thinking. I don't expect that. I'm looking for people to go, well, have you thought of this? Or actually, and the community generally are very good at that. You do, as you say, Chris, sometimes get the feedback in less than helpful ways, but that's the same with any social media and any topic. I've certainly seen it recently with sports teams and managers and whatever being berated because they've not signed the right player in the transfer window. And social media can be a right toxic place if it's not treated with the right amount of respect. And I've felt that in the testing world as well. And sometimes I know a lot of people have moved off Twitter because of that exact reason, where it's not very welcoming for someone new coming into the industry or in some areas. And actually you find that areas like LinkedIn are sometimes softer in that respect. But I think it's swings and roundabouts. I think wherever you're going to go, there's going to be both sides of the coin. And it's about how you navigate community in the right way.
I was going to echo that as well. Irrespective of what your first posts are and what the action is, there is always a space in the community for what you have to say.
Yeah.
And don't be put off if people are criticizing what you're saying. What they're trying to do is give it to you with the right context, that they're trying to persuade you that actually there are other ways of thinking about it. It's not usually within the testing community, because it is a community, it isn't a bashing exercise. They're not there to put you down, even though when you're starting out, you may feel like that. It's supposed to be constructive, and it's supposed to be a negotiation or a constructive conversation,
yeah.
Not nothing else. So do take it in that particular respect. And again, I would echo what you just said, Simon. If you find that with a particular community or a particular group, then just remove yourself from that group if you feel threatened by it, and try something else and go to a particular place where you may feel welcome.
Report things if it's inappropriate as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If it's completely inappropriate.
These things need to have codes of conduct and places that it's safe to have a respectful discourse and stuff.
What I would say, though, is I have grown because of the community. I think I've grown in testing. I've grown in my confidence. I've grown in my ability to do what I do and get to where I've got in my current role because the community has supported, given me feedback. And that goes at all levels of communities. Obviously, we've got our own community, the four of us, our slightly wider group as well that we have. That's been a huge support for me over the last 2 or 3 years. And I think the wider community as well, because as you say, you put stuff out there, you get feedback. Any feedback you get is an opportunity to grow. And if you use it in the right way, you can grow in the right way, and it can help you develop.
It's an interesting topic we're stumbling on, really, because I'm curious, because often we're testing ideas, often, or requirements. Those are the ideas. And that's what we're doing when we're reviewing or commenting on people's podcasts. We're actually trying to translate that. And it should teach us something about how we work with developers or other people, that by just going straight for it kind of thing, you can put a lot of people off, set them at nerves, and how you need to kind of be a bit respectful with how you give feedback and how you work, how you respond, and that not everyone's going to take it the same way. And you can't make sure everyone's happy, but you should be conscious of how you challenge anything, be it testing requirements or community experience, because we are so diverse, so big. There is a lot of different ideas out there, and they're ideas. Someone's idea is not wrong. It may not work for you. It's their idea, but it's their head. It's their thing. It's fine. But you might have something to add to it, to your point, Simon. Something that helps you grow, learn, see a different perspective. And if we can help people do that in our day jobs with stories, requirements, software, then you would hope that we should be quite good at it in a community sense as well, helping build people, helping solve problems better rather than being critics and evil and throwing daggers at each other, but there are good things and bad things, as I think Chris said. We live in a society where there's always going to be a bit
The
of
more we talk about things, I think the more that we can shape those opinions that we have and be challenged and grow with those ideas. And we've talked about this before, but the more we talk about these concepts, these ideas that we have, the better and sharper those opinions can become, which means that if we come into situations in our workplaces where maybe there might be resistance, there might be challenges, but we're sort of prepared because we've taught these things through. We've already been challenged. We've really worked out with a bit more focus the areas that are most important to us and our visions. Because we've had that conversation, because we've understood that those things work and have been discussed in other places, we can bring that fuel with us to those conversations, which can help us in our own workplace in a way that perhaps it wouldn't have done otherwise. I've certainly found that discussions where I am now, where people have explicitly asked, well, what do other people in your community do? What are the opinions? Are we wide of the mark with this idea that we have? Because the value is in community. This is why we see so many companies investing in creating communities, having community managers or departments. Like we know that Ministry of Testing started, but Rosie's doing her own really cool stuff now. We're seeing amazing community managers doing amazing things in public spaces, creating forums for people. And you mentioned Test Automation University, that thing's an incredible resource. But community is clearly something that has something that not only do people need, but I think companies are seeing the value in and investing in, because creating that sort of goodwill, supportive community thing, there's legs in that.
Yeah, I agree. And this is exactly the approach that I've learned over the last few years, is building that internal community as well. And I know we've touched on community practices in a previous episode, but building that internal community and having a community-driven approach to building stuff from the ground, setting a community up where that helps you define the standards for a particular way of working or a particular topic. And then it grows organically because it's not just you mandating they have to go and do something. They are choosing to be part of that community and to drive it, and getting people involved and engaged and focused brings a better commitment to doing it in a certain way.
Just a question. Do you think you have to pay to join a community or be forced into, for example, putting a few posts out or doing a minimum contribution to the community?
I would imagine that depends on the purpose of a community, right?
It's always the context.
It really is. Like if it's a community where the goal is to, as a community, we generate content, then sure, like maybe the goal of that community is that you're a part of this community if you contribute to those things. When I was a member of a church, you were considered a member of a church if you participated in stuff. Like, and I've read in conversations recently, questions on Twitter saying, should people be ejected from communities for non-participation? You know, there's lots of different reasons. Like, what does the community stand for? What is its purpose? What's it trying to achieve? If I buy into that, then maybe I will participate in that. Maybe there are costs that need to be covered to run said community. And if I am invested in and believe in those things and want to be a part of that, maybe I should. It really, honestly, it depends on what it stands for, what it's trying to achieve. I don't like the idea of having to pay to subscriptions to those things, but I can understand why there might be.
As you say, I think it does depend on what the community is for. I think the risk you run is if you set an expectation that you have to present a certain amount of posts or content in certain ways, then those people that want to just immerse themselves and be a sponge and learn stuff will go somewhere else. And you won't get them that will eventually blossom into someone that's learned a lot and starts producing stuff that is of really, real good value. So I think I wouldn't put expectations on people, but equally, I think it depends on the scenario, whether there's a cost associated with it or not, because I think there's plenty of perfectly good free communities out there, but they have to be well managed.
There's room for all sorts of shape and sizes and things. And we know enough people who work in moderate and run communities to know that there's also this whole level of people signing up, spam and moderation that's required, things that takes up time and money and things like that.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think this is just my personal view. I would always be wary of joining a community that is almost run by a particular company or vendor particularly. certainly some of the better communities I've been part of have been impartial from any particular tie-in from a particular tool or a particular product. I think you get a better holistic view of community when you have one that's not associated in some way or other.
I think you're right. I think that if you do have to pay or is linked to a company, then it might have a bias, for example, and it's quite important.
If it's visible though, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
If the bias is visible and it's up front, then I don't think there's necessarily...
No, there isn't. But actually, I mean, going back to communities which were originally done, a few of us mentioned about football. Often you would pay to join a football community or a football club because, as you said, Simon, there is an upfront cost. There is a cost of a certain amount because obviously as you put into the community, your cost might be time to get out what you want or even to read posts, even if you're just a passive part of the community. But I think they're all important.
Maybe one last point, but how do we measure the success of a community?
Very good question. Difficultly. It depends what you value in that community. You've got to think about that value. To me, it might be feeling a part of the team. It might be people reading my articles. It might be having listeners to a podcast, or it might be me taking data away from it, being able to learn something new, a skill, an idea. So it's a very hard thing to value. I think it's the feeling, though, ultimately, of being part of something greater than yourself. I think that's a hard thing to measure without kind of scaling systems. It's not true or false.
I think you're right. I think it's very difficult to measure the overall success of a community. For me, I get a real sense of community if I've either A, helped somebody or B, got help from somebody else. And that feeling of support is one thing that I really take from a good community. You can be part of a community where you don't feel that support and you leave. But equally, if you feel safe, then you will be more open. You will be more open to talk to other people. You'll share ideas yourself. And you're almost allowed to feel vulnerable. So if you are struggling with something, much like our group, the amount of times I've said how rubbish things are at a particular point, at a particular time in my past, I've been able to talk about it and feel confident that I'm not being judged. I'm not being put down or anything. You guys have been supportive and we've been able to work through my best ways to get through it, like free therapy almost, which community isn't about therapy, but it is about supporting others.
I would agree. I think it's completely about supporting. I think the successful communities are ones that are collaborative, that have good number of interactions with a number of people within the group. So it isn't just one voice dictating to everyone else. There is a collaboration and that the information within that community is useful and supportive.
I was going to say, I didn't know when I was reaching out to you guys and some other people that what I was trying to start was a community. I wanted to not feel alone in my context. And I knew that I wasn't. I just needed to find those other people that I could sort of pull together. And for me, I think the word I used with you guys was accountability. It was having the means to have that sort of someone hold me in check, to bounce ideas off, to share things with that I didn't have where I was. And I was at a point where I was alone and I needed others in order to feel like I could do my job where I was better with the help of other people, with the intention that I could also help other people. I think hopefully this has helped us. As Simon said, I certainly felt a lot of support and friendship from this. Until last year, as a four, we hadn't met before, and yet we knew each other. We supported each other. I'm assuming you all have direct messages without me about me telling everyone how silly I am. But I appreciate you. I appreciate the people that I get to see on the Testers Hangout. I appreciate people that I see on virtual coffees via the Ministry of Testing community. I appreciate the people I meet in conferences who are in the wider testing community. People that I get to engage with, that I get to either help with or share a conversation with, where we maybe learn or support or just be there for. That is, for me, what community is. And as long as people aren't devious, as long as people aren't trying to do something that isn't what they appear like they're doing, then I am on board and I'm here and I'm happy to help. And that hopefully is the essence of the testing community that you have had the chance to experience. I certainly feel like that's where I'm at today, and I hope it continues.
Sounds wonderful. And it's probably the perfect note to end on. I just want to say thank you very much for joining us once again. It's been a pleasure to talk as peers and on community. I just want to say thank you very much for listening to us. If you do have any feedback, any ideas, or anything else you want to talk to us about, please reach out to us at contactus@testingpeers.com. And you can also find us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, GoodPods, Patreon, and various other different places for the different sort of communities that exist within them. So feel free to reach out to us on those. And once again, thank you very much, Saffron QA. And just finally to say once again, thank you very much for listening. We do appreciate it. Tune in next time for something exciting. Thunderbolts and lightning.
For now, it's goodbye from the testing peers.
Goodbye.